Raskolnikov was already on his way into the interior of the apartment. He'd gone in looking as though he were doing all he possibly could in order not to burst with laughter. Behind him, as red as a peony, with a countenance that displayed rage and frustration, lanky of limb and clumsy of hand and foot, came the embarrassed Razumikin. At that moment the expression on his face and figure really was absurd, and fully justified Raskolnikov's laughter. Raskolnikov, who had not yet been introduced, bowed to the master of the premises, who stood in the middle of the room and was looking at them inquiringly, extending his hand, and shook that of his host, still making an extreme and visible effort to choke back his merriment and get out at least a couple of words of self-introduction. Scarcely, however, had he succeeded in assuming a serious air, than suddenly, as though unable to help himself, he glanced at Razumikin again, and this time failed to restrain himself. The smothered laughter burst forth all the more uncontainably for having been held back until now. The extraordinary rage with which Razumikin greeted this sincere laughter gave the whole of this scene an air of the most unfeigned joviality and, most importantly, naturalness. Razumikin, as though on purpose, did his bit to help things along. "You horrible devil!" he roared, gesturing with one arm, and immediately bringing it down on a small round table on which stood an empty tea glass. Everything went flying and splintering. "I say, why break the chairs, gentlemen? It's a drain on the exchequer," Porfiry exclaimed merrily. The scene unrolled in the following manner. Raskolnikov continued to laugh, his hand forgotten in that of his host, but knowing when enough was enough, began to look for an opportunity of bringing his mirth to as swift and natural a conclusion as possible. Razumikin, brought at last to the point of total disorientation by the falling of the table and the smashing of the glass, cast a gloomy eye at the splinters, made a mock spitting gesture, and turned abruptly towards the window, where he stood with his back to his audience, his face like thunder, looking outside but seeing nothing. Porfiry Petrovitch was laughing, and quite prepared to go on laughing, but it was plain that he wanted an explanation. Zamyotov, who had been sitting on a chair in one corner, had risen to his feet at the entrance of the visitors, and was standing expectantly, his mouth turned up in a smile, but in a state of bewilderment and even incredulity as he observed the entire scene, viewing Raskolnikov with downright embarrassment. Zamyotov's unexpected presence came as an unpleasant shock to Raskolnikov. "I'll have to get to the bottom of this," he thought. "Please, you must forgive me," he began, thrown badly off balance. "Raskolnikov's the name." "Oh, for goodness sake, sir, it's pleasant to meet you. And very pleasantly you came in too. What about him? Doesn't he want to say hello?" Porfiry Petrovitch said, nodding to Razumikin. "I honestly don't know why he got into such a rage at me. All I did was to tell him on the way here that he was a Romeo and backed it up with evidence. I don't think I said anything else." "Swine!" Razumikin answered, without turning around. "Well, there must be something very serious behind it if he lost his temper at one little word." Porfiry burst out laughing. "Oh, you investigator! Oh, to the devil with the lot of you!" Razumikin snapped, and then suddenly himself bursting into laughter, his face cheerful now, he went over to Porfiry Petrovitch as though nothing had happened, and said, "That's enough of that. We're all behaving like fools. Let's get down to business. This is my friend, Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov. In the first place, he's heard a lot about you and wanted to meet you. And in the second place, he's got a certain small item of business he'd like to talk to you about. Ah, Zamyotov, what are you doing here? I didn't know you knew each other. Known each other long, have you?" "What's this now?" Raskolnikov thought with alarm. Zamyotov seemed a bit put out, but not very badly. "I met him at your place last night," he said casually. "God must be looking after me. Last week this fellow kept pestering me to introduce him to you, Porfiry Petrovitch, and now you've sniffed each other out independently. That reminds me, where's your snuff? Porfiry Petrovitch was dressed for a day at home in a dressing gown, a spotlessly clean shirt, and a pair of down-at-heel slippers. He was a man of about 35, slightly below average in height, well fed, with even a slight paunch, clean shaven, with neither moustache nor side whiskers, the hair closely cropped on his large round head, which somehow bulged with a special prominence at the rear. His round, puffy and slightly snub-nosed face had an unhealthy dark yellow hue, but it was cheerful enough, even quizzical. He would even have been good-natured were it not for the expression in his eyes, which had a kind of watery liquid sheen and were almost concealed by white blinking eyelashes that seemed almost to be winking at someone. The look of those eyes was somehow strangely out of harmony with the rest of his figure, which had about it something that could only be described as feminine, and lent it a far more serious air than one might have expected at first sight. As soon as Porfiry Petrovitch heard that his guest had a small item of business to discuss with him, he lost no time in asking him to sit down on the sofa, himself sat down at its other end, and fixed his eyes upon him in eager anticipation of hearing the nature of the business, with that exaggerated and all too serious attention which actually has the effect of irking and embarrassing the other person right from the word go, particularly if he is a stranger, and particularly if what he has to tell is, in his own opinion, quite unmeriting of such extraordinarily serious attention. Even so, in a few brief coherent words, Raskolnikov made a clear and precise explanation of the matter, and was so pleased with himself that he even managed to take a good look at Porfiry. Porfiry Petrovitch likewise did not remove his eyes from him during all the time he talked. Razumikin, who had taken a seat opposite them at the same table, hotly and impatiently followed Raskolnikov's account of the matter, every moment or so transferring his gaze from one to the other, until it began to get a little out of hand. "Fool!" Raskolnikov cursed silently to himself. "What you should do, sir, is make a statement to the police," Porfiry replied with a thoroughly businesslike air. "What you say is that having learned of such and such an occurrence, this murder, in other words, you in your turn wish to inform the investigator in charge of the case that such and such objects are items of your possession, and that you wish to redeem them. Something of that sort, as a matter of fact. They'll write it for you." "You see, the thing is that just at this moment," Raskolnikov said, trying to sound as embarrassed as possible, "I'm right out of cash, and I can't even find the small change that would be necessary. What I'd like to do, you see, is simply make a declaration that these objects are mine, and that when I have the money—" "Oh, that doesn't make any difference, sir," Porfiry Petrovitch replied, greeting this explanation of Raskolnikov's finances with coldness. "But, if you like, you can simply write directly to me, saying something to the same effect, namely that having learned of such and such, and wishing to make a declaration concerning such and such items of your possession, you request—" "Can I write it on ordinary paper?" Raskolnikov hurriedly interrupted, again displaying an interest in the financial side of things. "Oh, on the most ordinary you wish, sir." And suddenly Porfiry Petrovitch gave him an almost openly mocking look, narrowing his eyes, practically winking at him. This was perhaps only how it seemed to Raskolnikov, as it lasted no more than a split second. At least something of the kind happened. Raskolnikov could have sworn that Porfiry had winked. The devil knew for what reason. "He knows," the thought flashed through him like lightning. You must forgive me for bothering you with such a trivial matter," he went on, slightly thrown off his balance. "Those things of mine aren't worth more than 5 roubles altogether, but they're particularly dear to me as a memory of those from whom I received them, and I must confess that when I found out about it I felt very alarmed. You fairly flew up in the air yesterday when I happened to mention to Zosimov that Porfiry was questioning the people who had pawned things with the old woman," Razumikin put in with evident intention. This was now beyond endurance. Raskolnikov lost his self-control and glared at him viciously with black eyes that burned with anger. He at once pulled himself together. "What's this, brother? Are you making fun of me?" he said, addressing him with skillfully manufactured irritation. "I can see that I'm possibly getting far too worked up about what to your eyes is simply old junk. But you can't call me either an egoist or greedy for that. In my eyes, those two worthless little objects aren't junk at all. I've only just finished telling you that that silver watch, which is only worth a few kopecks, is the only thing of my father's we have left. You may laugh if you wish, but my mother came to see me," he said, turning suddenly to Porfiry, "and if she were to find out that the watch has been lost," he went on, turning quickly to Razumikin this time, exerting a special effort to make his voice tremble, "she'd be in despair. Women! Oh, you've got it all wrong. I didn't mean it that way at all. Just the other way about," cried the aggrieved Razumikin. I wonder if that was the right thing to do, Raskolnikov thought to himself, with an inward tremor. Did it sound natural? Did I exaggerate too much? Why did I say women like that? "So your mother came to see you, did she?" Porfiry Petrovitch wanted to know for some reason. "Yes." "And when would that be now, sir?" "Yesterday evening." Porfiry said nothing, as though lost in thought. "Your things can't possibly have got lost," he went on, calmly and coldly. "I've been waiting for you to get here for ages." And as though nothing were particularly the matter, he carefully began to push the ashtray towards Razumikin, who was relentlessly scattering cigarette ash on the carpet. Raskolnikov started, but Porfiry seemed not to notice, still worried about Razumikin's cigarette. "What? Waiting? You mean you knew he'd pawned stuff there?" Razumikin exclaimed. Porfiry Petrovitch addressed Raskolnikov directly. "Both of your articles, the ring and the watch, were found in her apartment, wrapped up in the same piece of paper, with your name clearly marked in pencil on it, together with the date she received them from you." "How come you're so observant?" Raskolnikov smiled awkwardly, making a special effort to look him straight in the eye. But he couldn't control himself, and suddenly added, "I said that just now because there must have been an awful lot of people who'd pawned things, so many that it must have been hard for you to remember who they all were. Yet you seem to remember them all quite clearly, and stupid, clumsy, why did I put that in? Practically all of those who had pawned anything are now known to us, and you're the only one who hasn't been so good as to oblige," Porfiry replied, with a barely perceptible hint of mockery. "I've not been entirely well." "I've heard about that too, sir. I also heard that you've been very upset about something. Why, even now you look pale." "I'm not pale at all. There's absolutely nothing the matter with me," Raskolnikov snapped rudely and aggressively, suddenly altering his tone. The aggression was seething up in him, and he was unable to check it. "But if I behave aggressively, I'll give myself away," passed again like a flash through his head. "Oh, why are they tormenting me?" "Not entirely well," Razumikin chipped in. "Listen to the man. Up until yesterday he was practically unconscious and raving. Would you believe it, Porfiry? He could scarcely stand upright. Yet as soon as Zosimov and I had turned our backs yesterday, he got his clothes on, took to his heels, went off playing silly pranks somewhere almost until midnight. And all of this, I tell you, in a state of the most complete delirium. Can you imagine? Quite extraordinary." "You don't say. And in a state of the most complete delirium too? Do tell me more," Porfiry said, shaking his head with a womanish gesture. "Oh, rot. Don't believe him." "Well, you don't believe him anyway," Raskolnikov blurted out, far too aggressively. But Porfiry Petrovitch seemed not to hear these strange words. "Well, if you weren't delirious, why did you go out then?" Razumikin suddenly cried in angry vexation. "Why did you? What was your purpose? And why did it have to be in secret? Were you in your right mind? Now it's all over, I think I ought to be frank with you." "I got really fed up with everyone yesterday," Raskolnikov said suddenly, turning to Porfiry with an insolently provocative smile. So I ran away from them in order to rent another room where they wouldn't be able to find me. And I took a lot of money with me. Mr. Zamyotov here saw the money. Well, Mr. Zamyotov, was I in my right mind yesterday or was I delirious? Please resolve our dispute for us. He looked as though he'd have liked to strangle Zamyotov at that moment. Zamyotov's silence and the way he was staring at him were very decidedly not to his taste. Oh, in my opinion, you were talking very sensibly, even cleverly, sir, though I must say you did seem rather irritable, Zamyotov remarked thinly. You know, Nikodim Fomitch was telling me, Porfiry Petrovitch inserted, that he met you very late last night in the lodgings of some civil servant who had been run down in the street. Yes. What about that civil servant? Razumikin chimed in. Weren't you carrying on like a madman at his home? You gave all the money you had to his widow for funeral expenses. Well, if you wanted to help, I'd have understood if you'd given her 15 or even 20 or so and left 3 for yourself, but you went and lavished the whole 25 on her. What if I'd found some hidden treasure that you don't know about? What if that's why I was so generous? Ask Mr. Zamyotov. He knows I found some hidden treasure. Please forgive us, he said, turning to Porfiry Petrovitch, his lips quivering. It's really inexcusable of us to bother you for a whole half hour with such mundane recitation. You must be sick of us by now, eh? For heaven's sake, sir, not at all, not at all. If you only knew the interest you arouse in me. It's so fascinating to watch and listen. Indeed, I must confess, I'm delighted you've been so good as to do me the honour at last. What about some tea? My throat's as dry as a whistle, Razumikin exclaimed. A splendid idea. Perhaps we'll all join you. But wouldn't you like something a little more essential first? Oh, spare us the hospitality. Porfiry Petrovitch went off to order tea. The thoughts were spinning round in Raskolnikov's head like a whirlwind. He was horribly overstimulated. What's clear above all is that they're not bothering to cover anything up or stand upon ceremony. If he doesn't know me, why was he talking about me to Nikodim Fomitch? It can only mean that they don't even want to conceal the fact that they're following me like a pack of dogs. They're prepared to spit in my face quite openly, he thought, quivering with fury. Go on, why don't you just hit me straight out? Stop playing this cat and mouse game. I mean, it's offensive, Porfiry Petrovitch, and in any case, I may not let you go on with it. I'll get up and blurt out the whole truth to the lot of you, right in your ugly mugs, and then you'll see what contempt I have for you. And with an effort, he took a new breath. But what if it only seems this way to me? What if it's a mirage and I'm wrong about everything? What if I'm simply getting aggressive because my inexperience, my inability to sustain the shabby role I'm acting? Perhaps they don't mean anything by all these remarks. All the things they're saying are perfectly ordinary. Yet there's something else there too. They're all the kind of things one might say at any time, yet there's more to it. Why did he say, in her apartment, like that? Why did Zamyotov say, I'd spoken with cunning? Why are they using that tone? Yes, that's what it is, a tone. Razumikin's been sitting here too. Why hasn't he noticed anything? That innocent blockhead never notices anything. It's my fever again. Did Porfiry wink at me just then? Or didn't he? Oh, it's probably rubbish. Why would he wink at me? What are they trying to do? Get on my nerves? Or are they teasing me? Either it's all a mirage or else they know. Even Zamyotov's being insolent. Or is he? He's done some thinking overnight. I had a feeling he would. He's behaving as if he were at home, yet this is the first time he's been here. Porfiry isn't even treating him like a guest. He's sitting with his back to him. They're in league with each other, and it's because of me that they're in league. It's quite obvious that they were talking about me before we arrived. Do they know I went back to the apartment? Oh, I wish they'd hurry up and get it all over with. When I said I'd run away last night in order to rent another room, he let it pass, didn't raise any. It was clever of me to put in that bit about a room. It'll come in handy later on. In a state of delirium, he said. He knows all about yesterday evening, because he didn't know that my mother had come to town. And the old witch had even written the date on the things in pencil. You're wrong. I won't let myself be caught. I mean, those aren't facts. They're just a mirage. Come on, let's see some facts. Even the apartment's not a fact. It's just a feverish hallucination. I know what to say to them. Do they know about the apartment? I shan't leave until I've found out. Why did I come here? Well, I certainly am aggressive now, and that is a fact. God, how irritable I feel. Perhaps that's just as well. The role of the invalid. He's testing me. He'll try to throw me off balance. Why did I come here? All of this passed through his head like lightning. Porfiry Petrovitch returned almost instantly. He seemed suddenly to have become more cheerful. You know, cousin, I've still got a sore head after your party last night. In fact, I've come a bit unstuck all over, he began in a completely different tone, addressing his remark to Razumikin and laughing as he did so. Well, was it interesting? I mean, I left you just when it was starting to get interesting, didn't I? Who came out on top? No one, of course. They alighted on the eternal questions, but went up on a gust of hot air. Would you believe it, Roger? Last night they got onto the question of whether there's such a thing as crime or not. I told you they were talking a devil of a lot of nonsense. What's so extraordinary about it? It's such a social problem you hear discussed all the time, Raskolnikov answered, his thoughts elsewhere. Not in the terms in which they were formulating it, Porfiry observed. You can say that again, Razumikin hastened to agree, beginning to get worked up, as was his custom. I say, Rodion, listen, give me your opinion. I want to hear it. I nearly burst a blood vessel arguing with them last night before you arrived. I couldn't wait for you to get there. I told them you were coming, and what sparked it off was when we started talking about the view of the socialists. It's a view that is well known. Crime is a protest against the craziness of the social system. And that's all there is to it, no more than that, and no other reasons conceded, so it doesn't matter. Here comes the nonsense again, Porfiry Petrovitch exclaimed. He was growing visibly animated and kept laughing as he watched Razumikin, which set the latter still further ablaze. No other reasons are conceded. Razumikin came back at him with fervour. It's not nonsense. I can show you the books they have. They put it all down to being a prey to one's surroundings. And that's it. It's their favourite expression. From that it follows directly that if only society were to be organised sanely, crime would simply disappear, as there would be nothing to protest about, and everyone would become virtuous just like that. Nature isn't taken into consideration. Nature is banished. Nature is not supposed to exist. The way they see it, it's not mankind which, moving along a historical living path of development, will finally transmute itself into a sane society, but rather a social system, which, having emanated from some mathematical head, will at once reorganise the whole of mankind and in a single instant make it virtuous and free from sin, more speedily than any living process, bypassing any historical or living path. That's why they have such an instinctive dislike of history. It's nothing but a catalogue of outrages and follies, they say, and it can all be explained as a result of stupidity. That's why they have such distaste for the living process of life. They don't want the living soul. The living soul demands to live. The living soul demands and to be obedient to the laws of mechanics. The living soul is suspicious. The living soul is reactionary. No, what they prefer are souls which can be made out of rubber. Even they do have a smell of corpse flesh. But at any rate, they're not alive. They have no will of their own. They're servile, won't rebel. And as a result, they've reduced everything to brickwork and the disposition of the rooms and corridors inside a philantastry. Their philantastries may be ready, but the human nature that would fit them is not yet ready. It wants to live. It hasn't yet completed the vital process. It's not ready for the burial ground. It's impossible to leap over nature solely by means of logic. Logic may predict 3 eventualities, but there are 1,000,000 of them. Snip off the entire 1,000,000, reduce everything to the question of comfort, That's a very easy solution to the problem. Temptingly obvious. And one needn't even think about it. That's the main thing, that one shouldn't need to think. The whole of life's mystery can be accommodated within 2 printer's sheets. There he is, off again, beating his drum. He needs to be kept in hand, Porfiry laughed. Just imagine, he said, turning to Raskolnikov. There were 6 of them, all carrying on like that, in one room last night, and he'd filled them up with punch beforehand. Can you credit it? No, cousin, you're wrong. One's surroundings have a great deal to do with crime, I can assure you. Oh, you don't need to tell me that. But look, tell me this. A man of 40 rapes, a girl of 10. Is it his surroundings that have compelled him to do it? You know, in the strictest sense, that may very possibly be true, Porfiry observed with an unexpectedly serious air. Crimes against young girls may indeed very often be explained by reference to surroundings. Razumikin was by this time practically frothing at the mouth. All right, he roared. Shall I prove to you that you've got white eyelashes for the sole exclusive reason that the church of Ivan the Great is 35 sagenis high? And prove it clearly, in exact detail, in a progressive manner, with even a bit of liberal bias thrown in. If you're willing, I'm game. Is it a wager? I accept. Let him have our attention, if you please. I must say I shall be interested to hear his proof. Oh, the devil! He's always play-acting, damn him! Razumikin exclaimed, leaping up and waving an arm. It's not worth talking to you. I mean, he does it on purpose. You don't know him. Rodion, he did this last night. Took their side merely in order to make fools of us all. And my God, the things he was saying! And they were so pleased. I mean, he can go on for 2 weeks in that fashion. Last year, for some reason, he took it into his head to join a monastery. For 2 months he stuck to his story. It's not so long ago since he kept telling us that he had decided to get married, that everything was ready for the wedding. He'd even had new clothes made for himself. We'd all begun to congratulate him, but there was no bride, no nothing. It was all a mirage. You've got it wrong again. I had the clothes made earlier. It was the new clothes that gave me the idea of leading you all up the garden path. So you really are quite a play actor? Raskolnikov asked casually. Why, don't I look like one? Just you wait. I'll lead you up there too. No, look, sir, I'll be perfectly frank with you. The fact is that while we were talking about all that stuff just now, crime, one's surroundings, young girls, I suddenly remembered a certain little article. It's a bit of constant interest to me, actually. You wrote On Crime or something it was called. I can't remember the title now. I had the pleasure of reading it 2 months ago in the periodical Leader. An article by me? In the periodical Leader? Raskolnikov asked, in surprise. Well, it's true, I did write one about 6 months ago, after I left the university. It was a review of a book, but I wrote it for the newspaper, the Weekly Leader, not for the periodical. Well, the periodical is where it ended up. But I mean, the Weekly Leader went out of circulation. That's why it was never printed. That's true, sir. But when it went out of circulation, the Weekly Leader was incorporated into the periodical Leader. And so 2 months ago your article appeared in the periodical Leader. Didn't you know? Raskolnikov really did know nothing about it. For goodness sake, why, you can request payment for that article. What a peculiar character you are. You live such a cloistered existence. You don't have the faintest notion about matters that concern you personally. I mean, it's a fact, sir. Bravo, Rodya! I didn't know about it either, Razumikin exclaimed. I'm going to go down to the reading room today and ask for the issue. 2 months ago, you say. What date? Oh, it doesn't matter. I'll find out. There's a nice thing. He won't even tell me. But how did you know the article was by me? There was nothing but an initial at the bottom of it. Oh, I found out by chance just the other day, actually, through the editor. He's an acquaintance of mine. I was very interested. Let's see now. My article was about the psychological state of a criminal's mind throughout the entire process of committing the crime, wasn't it? Yes, sir. and you insisted that the enactment of a crime is invariably accompanied by illness. Most original, but that wasn't actually the part of your little article that interested me so much. It was rather a certain idea that you introduced at the end of the piece, but which you unfortunately alluded to only in passing, obscurely. In short, if you remember, you made a certain allusion to the idea that there may exist in the world certain persons who are able, or rather who are not only able, but have a perfect right to commit all sorts of atrocities and crimes, and that it's as if the law did not apply to them. Raskolnikov smiled ironically at this crass and intentional distortion of his idea. What? What on earth? A right to crime? Not because of the influence of one's surroundings, I hope? Razumikin inquired with a certain alarm. No, it has nothing to do with that, Porphyry replied. The whole point of his article is that the human race is divided into the ordinary and the extraordinary. The ordinary must live in obedience and do not have the right to break the law because they're ordinary, you see. The extraordinary, on the other hand, have the right to commit all sorts of crimes and break the law in all sorts of ways precisely because they're extraordinary. That's more or less what you wrote, isn't it? If I'm not mistaken. What the devil? This can't be right, Razumikin muttered in bewilderment. Raskolnikov gave his ironic smile again. He had at once realized what was going on and towards what he was being pushed. He went over the article in his mind. He decided to accept the challenge. No, that's not quite what I wrote, he began, in a modest, unassuming tone. Actually, I'll admit that you've given an almost correct account of my idea, even a completely correct one, if you like. He seemed to take pleasure in agreeing that it was completely correct. The only point of difference is that I don't at all insist that extraordinary people are in all circumstances unfailingly bound and obliged to commit all sorts of atrocities, as you put it. Indeed, I don't even think that an article which said that would be allowed into print. No, all I did was quite simply to allude to the fact that an extraordinary person has a right, not an official right, of course, but a private one, to allow his conscience to step across certain obstacles. And then only if the execution of his idea, which may occasionally be the salvation of all mankind, requires it. You say that my article is obscure. I'm prepared to explain it to you, to the best of my ability. I think I may not be mistaken in supposing that that is what you'd like me to do. By all means, sir. It is my view that if the discoveries of Kepler and Newton could not, on any account, as a result of certain complex factors, have become known to people other than by means of sacrificing the life of one person, the lives of 10, 100, or even more persons who are trying to interfere with those discoveries or stand as an obstacle in their path, then Newton would have had the right, and would even have been obliged, to get rid of those 10 or 100 persons in order to make his discoveries known to all mankind. From this it does not, of course, follow that Newton had the right to kill anyone or everyone he wanted to, or go stealing at the market every day. Furthermore, as I remember it, I went on to develop the idea that for example, all the lawmakers and guiding spirits of mankind, starting with the most ancient ones and continuing with the Lycurguses, the Solons, the Homits, the Napoleons, and so on, were all, every one of them, criminals, if only by the fact that in propounding a new law they were thereby violating an old one that was held in sacred esteem by society and had been inherited from the ancestors, and of course they did not shrink from bloodshed. If blood, sometimes entirely innocent and shed in valour for the ancient law, if blood was something that could in any way help them. It is in fact worth noting that the majority of those benefactors and guiding spirits of mankind were particularly fearsome bloodletters. In short, I argued that all people, not only the great, but even those who deviate only marginally from the common rut, that is to say, who are only marginally capable of saying something new, are bound by their very nature to be criminals, to a greater or lesser degree, of course. Otherwise, they'd find it hard to get out of the rut. And it goes without saying that, again, because of their nature, they could not possibly agree to remain in it. And indeed, in my view, they have a positive duty not to agree to remain in it. As you'll perceive, there's nothing particularly new in my arguments so far. All this has been printed and read 1,000 times. As for my division of people into the ordinary and the extraordinary, I agree that it is somewhat arbitrary. But after all, I don't insist on precise figures. It's only my central idea that I place my faith in. And that idea consists in the notion that by the law of their nature, human beings in general may be divided into two categories. A lower one, that of the ordinary, that is to say, raw material, which serves exclusively to bring into being more like itself, and another group of people who possess a gift or a talent for saying something new in their own milieu. There are within these two categories infinite subdivisions, of course, but the distinguishing features of each are quite clearly marked. The people of the first category, the raw material, that is, are in general conservative by nature, sedate, live lives of obedience, and like to be obeyed. In my view, they have a duty to be obedient, as that is their function, and there is really nothing about this that's degrading to them. The second category all break the law, are destroyers, or have a tendency that way, depending on their abilities. The crimes of these people are, of course, relative and multifarious. For the most part, what they're demanding, in highly varied forms, is the destruction of the present reality in the name of one that is better. But if such a person finds it necessary, for the sake of his idea, to step over a dead body, over a pool of blood, then he's able, within his own conscience, to give himself permission to do so, always having regard to the nature of the idea and its dimensions. Note that. It's in this sense alone that I speak in my article of their right to crime. You'll remember that we started off with the discussion of a legal question. Actually, there's no need to get particularly alarmed about this. You know, the masses are almost never prepared to acknowledge them this right. They flog them or hang them, more or less, thereby quite correctly exercising their conservative function. The only slightly odd thing being that in subsequent generations, those same masses put on a pedestal the people they flogged or executed, and pay homage to them, more or less. Those of the first category are always the lords of the present, while those of the second category are the lords of the future. The first conserve the world and increase its population. The second move the world and lead it towards a goal. Both the one and the other have a completely equal right to exist. In short, the way I see it, everyone possesses equal rights. And vive la guerre éternelle, until the New Jerusalem, of course. So you do still believe in the New Jerusalem, do you? Yes, I do, Raskolnikov answered firmly. As he said this, he looked at the floor, as he had done throughout the whole of his long tirade, choosing a particular point on the carpet to fix his eyes on. And do you believe in God? Forgive me for being so inquisitive. Yes, I do, Raskolnikov said again, raising his eyes to Porfiry. And do you believe in the resurrection of Lazarus? Yes. Why are you asking all this? Do you believe it literally? Yes. Really, sir, I was simply curious. Please forgive me. But there's just one thing. I'm going back to what you were saying just now. I mean, they don't always flog them or hang them. In fact, some of them come out on top in their own lifetime. Oh yes, some of them get what they want while they're still alive, and then they themselves start flogging and executing people, if they have to. And you know that's exactly what most of them do. On the whole, your remark is rather a witty one. Thank you, sir. But now tell me this. How do you distinguish these extraordinary people from the ordinary ones? Do they have some sort of special birthmark? What I mean is, we need a bit more precision there, a bit more external focus. as it were, you must forgive in me the natural anxiety of a practical and well-intentioned man, but might it not be possible to give them some sort of special clothing to wear, for example? Or perhaps they could be branded. For I think you'd agree that if there were to be a mix-up, and a person from one of the categories thought he belonged to the other, and started to clear away all the obstacles, as you so neatly called them, that happens all the time. That remark was even wittier than the last one. Oh, thank you, sir. Not at all, sir, but please bear in mind that mistakes are only possible on the part of the first category, that is, of the ordinary people, as I perhaps quite unsuitably called them. In spite of their inborn tendency towards obedience, a certain capriciousness of temperament, which is not denied even to the cow, leads rather a large number of them to fondly suppose they're progressive individuals, and in the guise of destroyers, to appropriate the new word for themselves. And this in all sincerity, sir. Often, however, they fail to notice the genuinely new people, and even look down on them as being persons of backward and degrading views. But I do not believe that they represent any significant threat, and you really need not be anxious, as they never get very far. Of course, it would do them no harm to give them a thrashing now and then, to punish them for getting carried away, and to remind them of their rightful place. But no more than that. One doesn't even need a whipmaster for the job. They'll whip themselves, because they're very well behaved. Some of them will perform this service for one another, while others do it for themselves with their own hands. Moreover, they impose various public acts of penitence on themselves. The effect is both splendid and edifying, and in short, you have nothing to worry about. It's a kind of law. Well, you set my mind at rest a little on that score. But, you know, there are other things that trouble me, sir. Please tell me, are there many of these people who have the right to murder others, of these extraordinary folk? I mean, I'm prepared to treat them with the respect they merit, of course, but you must admit, it would be a bit terrifying if there are a great many of them, sir, eh? Oh, you needn't worry about that either, Raskolnikov went on, in the same tone of voice. On the whole, there are extremely few people with new ideas, or who are even the merest bit capable of saying something new. So few that it's almost strange. The only thing that's clear is that the order that governs the way in which people come into the world and creates all these categories and subdivisions must be very accurately and precisely determined by some law of nature. The law is, of course, at present unknown to us. But I believe in its existence and think that one day we shall know what it is. The vast mass of people, the human material, exists in the world solely in order at last, by means of a kind of effort, a process that so far remains a mystery to us, involving some strange crossing of generations and races, to muster its strength and bring into the world the one person out of 1,000 who is even slightly independent. One person out of 10,000, I'm talking approximately by the way of illustration, is perhaps born with a somewhat higher degree of independence. One out of 100,000 with even more. People of genius are born one out of millions, while the great geniuses, the achievers of humanity, only come into being after many thousands of millions of people have passed through the earth. In a word, I haven't seen inside the retort where all this takes place, but there is quite certainly, and is bound to be, a law of some kind. All this cannot be the result of chance. What you're both doing? Playing jokes or something? What are you up to? Razumikin exclaimed at last. Are you pulling each other's legs, or aren't you? There they sit, chaffing at each other. Are you being serious, Roger? Raskolnikov silently raised his pale and almost mournful face to him and made no reply. And beside this quiet, mournful countenance, Razumikin thought strange the irritable, obtrusive, unconcealed, and uncivil causticity of Porphyry. Well, brother, if this is really serious, then of course you're right when you say this is nothing new and resembles all the things we've read and heard 1,000 times. But what is really original about all this, and this really is your own exclusive property, much to my horror, is that you condone the shedding of blood on grounds of conscience. And if you'll forgive me, with such fanaticism. That's what your article is really all about. I mean, to condone the shedding of blood on grounds of conscience is in my opinion, more terrible than if it were to be permitted officially by law. Perfectly true. It is more terrible, sir, Porphyry remarked. No, you must have got carried away. There's some mistake here. I'll read it. You got carried away. You can't possibly think that. I'll read it. None of that's actually in the article. It's merely alluded to, Raskolnikov said. Quite so, sir, quite so, Porphyry said, unable to keep still in his seat. I think I've almost grasped the way in which you choose to view crime, sir, but please forgive me for being so insistent. I really am putting you to a lot of trouble. I feel quite guilty. You see, sir, it's like this. You set my mind at rest just now with regard to erroneous instances of confusion between these two categories. But, well, there are certain practical possibilities that still bother me. Take some man or some young chap who imagines he's a Lycurgus or Mohammed, a budding one, of course. Well, off he goes to clear away all the obstacles. And he says to himself, I've a long way ahead of me, and I'll need some more money for the road. Well, and so he starts going about getting his hands on that money. You know what I mean? Zamyotov gave a sudden snort from the corner in which he was sitting. Raskolnikov did not even raise his eyes to look at him. I must admit, he replied calmly, that cases of that kind are indeed bound to occur. Those who are stupid and vain are particularly liable to swallow that hook, especially the young. Well, sir, you take my point then. I mean, how can that be allowed, sir? Oh, that's just the way things are, I'm afraid, Raskolnikov said, with an ironic smile. It's not my fault they're like that. That's the way things are, and that's how they'll always be. Take what he nodded at Razumikin, said just now about my condoning bloodshed. So what if I do? I mean, society's all too well provided with such phenomena as exile, prison, legal investigators, penal servitude. So what's there to worry about? All you have to do is catch your thief. All right. Say we do catch him. What then? Well, he's got what he deserves. Oh, one can't say you're not logical. Well, sir, what about his conscience? Why should you care about that? Oh, for humanitarian reasons, sir. If he has one, he'll suffer when he realizes the error of his ways. That's his punishment. That, in addition to penal servitude. Yes, but what about the really gifted ones? Razumikin asked, frowning. I mean, the ones who've been granted the right to murder. Are they not obliged to suffer at all, not even for the blood they've shed? Why do you use the word obliged? There's no permission or prohibition involved in any of this. Let him suffer if he's sorry for his victim. Pain and suffering are inevitable for persons of broad awareness and depth of heart. The truly great are, in my view, always bound to feel a great sense of sadness during their time on earth. He suddenly added, in a reflective tone, that was hardly that of a conversation. He raised his eyes, looked at them all thoughtfully, smiled, and picked up his cap. He was very calm now, compared to the way he had been when he'd walked in just now, and he could feel this. They all got up. Well, sir, you'll no doubt curse me for this, and it'll probably make you angry, but I simply cannot restrain myself, Porphyry Petrovitch said, resuming his argument again. Please permit me to give expression to just one more little question. I know I'm causing you the most terrible bother, sir. One more little idea, simply so I don't forget it. Very well. Tell me your little idea, Raskolnikov said, standing before him in pale and serious anticipation. What I mean is, sir, goodness, I don't even know how to find the right words for it. Such a playful little idea, a psychological one, sir. What I mean is, sir, that when you were writing your article, it couldn't just possibly have been, could it, that you too considered yourself, just the merest bit, to be one of the extraordinary people who can say a new word in the sense you've explained. I mean, is that the case, sir? I wouldn't rule it out, Raskolnikov answered contemptuously. Razumikin made a movement. But if that's the case, sir, then is it really possible that you might also have decided, because of some everyday setback or financial difficulty, let's say, or because you wanted to further the interests of all humanity in some way, to step across an obstacle, by robbing and murdering someone, for example? And again he suddenly winked at him with his left eye and shook with silent laughter, in exact repetition of his behaviour a few minutes earlier. If I had, I certainly wouldn't tell you, Raskolnikov replied, with a challenging, haughty contempt. Oh, but I mean, sir, you must understand, my interest stems solely from a desire to understand your article, and is of a purely literary nature. Ugh, how brazen and obvious this is, Raskolnikov thought with disgust. Please let me make it perfectly clear, he replied coldly, that if I consider myself neither a Mahomet nor a Napoleon, nor any of those other persons of that kind, and not being one of them, am consequently unable to give you a satisfactory account of how I might have behaved. Oh, for heaven's sake, who doesn't think he's a Napoleon among us in Russia these days? Porfiry suddenly articulated with breathtaking familiarity. This time even the intonation of his voice contained an extraordinarily clear hint. Perhaps it was some budding Napoleon who did in old Alyona Ivanovna with an axe last week, Samyotov suddenly barked out from his corner. Raskolnikov said nothing and looked at Porfiry with a firm, fixed gaze. Razumikin frowned gloomily. Even before this he had begun to sense that something was wrong. Angrily he looked about him. A moment of gloomy silence elapsed, and Raskolnikov turned to go. Off already? Porfiry said sweetly, extending his hand in a thoroughly amiable manner. Most glad to have made your acquaintance. Oh, and about your application. Don't let anyone put you off. Just write it the way I told you. In fact, the best thing would be if you looked in to see me there in a day or two, or why not tomorrow? You can be sure of finding me there at around 11. We'll sort it all out, have a bit of a talk. As one of the last people to have been there, you might be able to tell us a few things, he added with the most good-natured air. You want to question me officially with all the trappings? Raskolnikov asked sharply. Why would I want to do that, sir? That's not at all required for the time being. You took what I said the wrong way. You see, I never miss a chance. And since I've already talked to all the people who had pawned things, taken statements from some of them, and you as the last person... Oh, but listen, by the way, he exclaimed, suddenly brightening up with some recollection. I've just remembered. What could I have been thinking of? He said, turning to Razumikin. I mean, you know that Nikolashka you were giving me an earache about the other day? Well, I mean, I know perfectly well, he continued, addressing Raskolnikov, that the fellow's got clean hands. But what was I to do, after all? I had to inconvenience Mitka as well. That's where the heart of the matter lies, sir, its very essence. Now, permit me to ask, when you made your way up that staircase, well, would it have been some time between 7 and 8, sir? Yes, that's right, Raskolnikov replied, at that very second experiencing a nasty feeling that it might have been better not to say this. Well, between 7 and 8 that evening, as you were making your way up that staircase, didn't you see, in the apartment on the second floor, the one was unlocked and had its door open, remember? 2 workmen, or at any rate one of them. They were decorating in there, didn't you notice? Now this is very, very important for them. Decorators? No, I didn't see them, Raskolnikov replied slowly, and as though he were digging about in his memory, at the same instant straining the whole of his being and shivering with the torment of trying to perceive as quickly as possible where the trap was, and not to miss anything. No, I didn't see any decorators, and I don't think I noticed an unlocked apartment of that kind either. But on the 4th floor now... He'd already worked out where the trap was and felt triumphant. I do remember there was a government clerk moving out of the apartment opposite Alyona Ivanovna's. I distinctly remember that some soldiers were carrying some sort of sofa outside. I remember being squeezed against the wall as they passed. But decorators... No, I don't remember there being any decorators. And I'm sure there were no unlocked apartments either. Yeah, I'm quite sure. Wait a minute, Razumikin exclaimed, suddenly, as though coming to his senses and realising what was happening. I mean, the decorators were painting there on the day of the murder itself, and he was there 3 days earlier. What are you trying to get him to say? Oh, damn, I've got confused, Porphyry said, clapping his hand to his forehead. The devil take it, this case is too much for my poor brain, he went on, turning to Raskolnikov, almost as if in apology. The thing is, you see, it's so important we should find someone who saw them between 7 and 8 in that apartment that I went and imagined just now that you could tell us. I got completely confused. Well, you ought to be a little more careful, Razumikin observed sourly. These last words were spoken in the entrance hall. Porphyry Petrovitch ushered them right to the door with the utmost affability, and when they emerged onto the street, they were both sullen and gloomy, and they walked several yards without saying a word. Raskolnikov took a deep breath.